Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to another Pencil live stream. I'm going to kick off this week by apologising for my very lonely looking plant at the back there. I've been told before this kicked off that it's looking a little bit forlorn over there, but it's the best I've got in this very bare room. This week I am delighted to be joined by our Head of Information Security, Liam Dunn, to talk all things InfoSec.
Hi, Tom.
Liam, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm actually really well, thank you.
Wonderful. So look, I think the purpose of this stream is really to kind of get to the nub of where we kind of separate the hype of AI risks in information security and what the actual reality is. What things should you actually be concerned about, and how do they match up with the the headlines that people are going to see across social media and in the press and all of the rest of it. So I guess perhaps we kick off there by sort of asking, like, what are the most common misconceptions people have when they think about onboarding AI tools from an InfoSec standpoint?
Okay. I mean, it's an interesting question, and I do think there are going to be differing opinions on this one, because obviously I'm going to look at it through a lens which is very information security focused. But since that's the topic for today, then I'm good with it, right? So I think it's probably around the expectation that onboarding an AI tool is going to be a technical project. And I really don't think it is necessarily a technical project. I think in reality it's a sort of a people and process transformation. You can't just choose a model, bung it into production without clear policies, risk assessments, and actually talking to your users and understanding how they're going to use it and all that kind of stuff. The things that I'm hearing about, I'm not going to say that I've seen it necessarily, but the things I'm hearing about are cases where somebody's gone, oh, this model's really popular at the moment, I've heard about this one, we're going to buy that, and they haven't sort of spoken to the users, understood what their workflows are, and actually found a tool that is going to benefit people. Because I mean, certainly at Pencil, right, we're all about being a tool. That's the aim here. We're supposed to make people's lives easier. We're not trying to kind of replace anybody. So it's very much going to be about understanding where AI fits in a workflow, choosing a tool based on that, and then doing all of your normal kind of security stuff like onboarding the tool properly. And that's going to require talking to other teams, right? It's a cross-functional alignment. So you want to talk to your legal team, your security team, your engineering team, your product team. Make sure everybody that's got a stake in this is comfortable with the tool that you're onboarding. Do a little bit of threat modeling, understand, what happens if it goes wrong, what happens if people are using the tool incorrectly, and then onboard it as if it were any other tool. And I think that's about it for me. I don't want to labour it too much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, well, it sounds like essentially what you're saying is that there's not really a huge degree of difference, and actually the main vulnerabilities, as always, are going to be like the humans, right? Like a perfect machine would be, I guess, impenetrable, theoretically, and that it's the managing expectations and processes on the human side that's usually the issue in any kind of SaaS
Yeah,
tool, and AI is no different, I guess.
there are a couple of kind of infosec tropes that kind of come into play here. So one
Okay.
is, the most secure thing is the thing that's turned off, right? And it's about managing risk as much as it is about managing people and expectations. If you understand where your data is, what you're trying to do with it, then onboarding AI becomes very similar to onboarding any other SaaS platform, frankly, whether it's, a CRM tool or an antivirus product, it doesn't really matter. You do your due diligence, you do your risk assessments, you bring it on board.
So are there any differences then? Like I take your kind of your broad overarching point, which is that really the fundamentals are very similar. Is there anything specific to AI tools that is a point of differentiation, or would you say it's completely the same straight up and down?
I wouldn't say it's completely the same straight up and down, but again, that's very much based on your use case, right?
Yeah.
So take Pencil for example. What we do fundamentally is help people make adverts, right? The things that we are doing with our AI platform is designed to be public at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost want to touch wood saying this, but if the worst were to happen and something caused us to lose a lot of customer data, we're losing adverts, ultimately things which are designed to be public, which are designed to be seen by as many people as possible, right? So our risk is relatively low. We're, I don't want to say more concerned, but equally concerned about reputation and
Yeah.
copyright and a whole bunch of kind of IP infringement type things, depending on what people are doing with our tooling. But if you're working in, product development and you've got a whole bunch of developers and engineers, and the tool that they're onboarding is designed to help them code software, and something goes horribly wrong, like we saw in the news very recently, where a tool suggested to the user that they delete the entire database, and there goes your production environment. That's a different set of risks, right? That's a different scenario. So we're kind of unique, kind of lucky in that the work that we do, the industry we're in, it is comparatively low risk. So this is why I say understand what it is that you're trying to do with the tool, and then model your threats around your use case.
Yeah. And I guess, so we are often speaking with enterprise, right? So is there a big difference between the way SMBs should be looking at the risk from AI, which I guess is in most cases in Pencil's world, in the marketing world, basically negligible, right? If something leaks from an SMB standpoint, okay, it's an ad that you never ran that still nobody's going to see, right? Whereas from an enterprise point of view, they've just got much more data, right? So is there a bigger list of considerations that you're going to be thinking about from an enterprise standpoint than you would for like a large SMB, let's say?
So I think the bigger you get, the increase in risk of things like shadow IT becomes. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's the idea that your employees are using a thing whether you want them to or not. Okay. And this is, I think, a fundamental message of today, and that I've been sort of touting for a little while now, which is AI is kind of inevitable within the workplace, because you might have seen in the press this morning, Google started releasing to the UK their new updated search page, which is going to increase the amount of AI generated content, and it's going to allow people to sort of opt in and reduce the kind of traditional links that are displayed. So even just doing a simple internet search now is going to use some sort of AI kind of functionality. I was working in betting and gaming a little while back, and our knee-jerk reaction to sort of ChatGPT and various others going live was to try and block them. That was just the default position a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
right? We're not going to do that. And I very quickly realized that what happened was our sales team, who were really keen on it, just started using ChatGPT on their mobile phone. Okay, you've got a visitor.
I've got a wasp. Sorry. I don't know where he came from. It's that time of year. I'm sure I think he's gone.
Right.
Oh God,
He's not
yes,
gone.
I'm sorry. Sorry to everybody watching this. This is extremely unprofessional, but there's not really anything I can do about this wasp. I think he's gone. Okay. Sorry, sorry about that. The joys of live broadcasts, I guess. But yes, so look, on the shadow IT point, I can remember having conversations like that, because obviously, prior to working at Pencil, I was creating content about AI anyway, and working in marketing. I can remember having conversations with lots of people where they were just sort of saying, look, we don't want to use any AI at all. We're really worried about the copyright plagiarism risk, and we're going to shut it out, and therefore there is no risk, right? And I think that was quite a commonly held position amongst large enterprises for, I don't know, at least like a year, 18 months maybe, before they started to realize, as you say, the inevitability. The technology is just too useful, I
ubiquitous
suppose.
now, isn't it? It's in everything. It is everywhere, and I think that's something we just have to accept.
Yeah.
So if we were, I mean, your original question was around SMBs versus enterprises, right?
Yep.
And the reason I sort of flagged the idea of shadow IT being a bigger risk in an enterprise is simply because there's more people, there's more staff, the chances of it happening are increased. So we really just need to sort of educate our colleagues and say, this one's been approved for use by the business, this one hasn't.
Mm.
And if you have an enterprise agreement with a provider, I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily realize it right now, but it is possible to sign up to AI tools and have a no train agreement so that they can't train their models or future iterations of their models on the data that you present as companies. And you know that gives you a certain amount of kind of comfort.
We should
And
mention from a self-interested point of view that that is available on Pencil. So you know, if you want to be, if you want those kinds of agreements with your marketing AI tools, hit us up. You know, hit the book demo button on the Pencil website. It's not to be too salesy, but
nice
had to
plug.
throw it in there. Yeah.
So yeah, this is the reality, right? Is people are going to be using some sort of AI, and if you can steer people through education and encouragement to using a tool that you've vetted, you've onboarded, great. Okay, that's the dream, isn't it? Really, just
Mm.
stop trying to block stuff because it's too late now. And I think there's sort of historic examples of this kind of stuff happening, and just to sort of talk back to some of the sort of threat modeling and things along those lines, and perhaps give people a little bit of comfort around what we're talking about here. If you go back to the early 2000s, there was a tool called Smarter Child. Well, in actual fact, I think it was developed by ActiveBuddy, and most people encountered it through AOL as Smarter Child. And it was literally a chatbot sort of based out of the AOL Instant Messenger. And back in the day, people, the company ActiveBuddy, they maintained a whole bunch of databases, everything from stock information to movie timetables to yellow pages listings, sports data, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And the really cool thing about it at the time was that their database, because it was manually updated at the time, there was a bunch of people, like 600 staff or something, keeping it all up to date. You got up to the minute sports data coming out of those things, and if you look at some of the models nowadays, they were last refreshed in sort of April of the year before last or something. So only if
Mm.
you give them access to the internet can they give you up to date stuff. And that Smarter Child product, chatbot, was available for 5 or 6 years in the early 2000s before Microsoft bought it and basically closed it down. But the point I'm trying to make is that we've been onboarding chatbot-like tools for more than 25 years now, right?
Yeah.
Yes, AI is cool and it's got a lot of hype, but I remember at university I did some sort of, additional modules in what was considered to be cognitive science. I mean, that was ultimately neural networks and things of that nature. We've given it a cool new name. We've polished it up a little bit and punted it out the window as kind of AI, but we have been dealing with tools like this for 25 years now. And
Mm.
I think if we can get particularly sort of security and procurement people to realize that this isn't the big scary that perhaps the media thinks it is, a lot of those kind of onboarding of AI tools conversations can be had with a little bit less emotion involved.
Yeah, 100%. So look, touching on procurement then, I know we don't want to spend too much time on, certifications and stuff of that nature, but it feels like maybe this is a good point now to briefly mention, from a procurement standpoint, certifications that, like what the point of them is and how you can effectively, I guess, shortcut a lot of your processes if you're in procurement. So things like, SOC, like, do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah,
Like,
happily. So there are a number of certifications, standards, attestations, frameworks, dependent on where you are in the world, what language is preferred. But the sort of common ones you find in my industry are going to be ISO 27001, which is fundamentally a European standard, and SOC 2, which arguably is its equivalent, kind of. I'm being a bit lazy with my descriptions there, but
Are the InfoSec people watching going to be
there's
like
going to be
touching
some
at their
cringing
screen?
going on in the background. But you know, they're the two that I sort of think of that are roughly equate. And the great thing about these sort of certifications, attestations, is that you are audited by an external auditor, independent external auditor, to a set of known published standards. So when a company like Pencil advertises that we are SOC 2 compliant, what we're saying is we're a safe pair of hands. You can trust that our independent auditors have gone through upwards of 80 plus controls dependent on the level you've been audited to, and they have all been found to be present, operational and effective. And that's really cool, because what it means now is that all of that kind of back and forth that you have to do whenever you're trying to onboard a new provider, in terms of understanding how good their security is, how good their processes are, whether they've got any maturity, you can kind of just choose to put your faith in the SOC 2 standard and say, right, they've been audited independently, great, let's move on to the next stage and argue about features or functionality or some of that sort of stuff.
And I guess ultimately, if you're in procurement, the ROI on that is just that it's saving you a heap of time, right? You haven't got to go through and do all of that like admin yourself.
I mean, it is very much dependent on the procurement team and the security team as well, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I do see some teams choose not to put their faith in those standards, and we end up sort of answering a lot of questions ourselves. And that's fine, right? If people have got concerns, we're here to help. But I think it is a powerful tool, and I'm very pleased that we've done it.
Excellent. So I was going to come on to ask you about what a sort of resilient posture, security posture looks like, you know, in 2025. So I suppose things like SOC are a part of that, but presumably there's a broader spectrum of things that you should be taking into account.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to sound a bit boring now, but these really do depend on your business use case, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who works in healthcare is going to have a very different set of concerns to somebody who works in finance or who works in sportswear, for instance. So I think the kind of answer here that I can give you is to understand your threats, to do that threat modeling, and then address those. So this is about risk-based security, right? One of the things that you'll find an awful lot in business generally, enterprise particularly, is that you become compliance driven. So those SOC standards, those ISO standards that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, they are a set of goals, almost like a checklist. And if they drive you, if you're literally just trying to become compliant, because different industries have their own regulatory requirements, and some of those, in fact, are the same sort of certifications as we were talking about, then you end up compliant but not necessarily secure. The two don't equal each other, right? So by doing that kind of threat modeling work, by understanding what your risks are, what your goals are, what your product is, where your data is, who's using it, all of that kind of good stuff, then you can push for security first and compliance second. And I think that's an interesting take, simply because a lot of businesses will want the compliance because it does sort of grease the wheels in exactly the way you were alluding to earlier in this call. It's just, I think, from a lot of security personnel's perspective, they want to do security first, right? They want to add value. They want to prove their worth. So it does very much depend on the business.
Okay, excellent. So look, we've got a fair few people watching us, so I am gonna if anybody has any questions, do feel free to drop them. Questions for Liam. Obviously, I can't imagine there's much you want me to answer. Any questions for Liam on InfoSec with AI, do feel free to drop a comment either on LinkedIn or on YouTube on the post. But I will continue with questions of my own, and I will come back and read those out if any drop in. So the next thing I was going to come on to you about is a bit of a kind of thought experiment. What is one thing that people worry about with AI that they probably shouldn't? And then what's one thing that they don't worry about, but that they should? A thing that they don't worry about enough.
All right, give me a second on that one. I think, yeah, okay. I think there's an awful lot of hype at the moment about existential risk, right? Rogue AIs, all that kind of stuff. But the real world issues are kind of much more grounded. It's around prompt leakage, poor output controls, hallucinated data, all of the kind of stuff that you see in the press. That shadow AI use, that shadow IT use that I talked about, again, they're the things that we should be worried about as business professionals, right? And I think, we've got tools like RAG to kind of reduce hallucinations and all of that kind of stuff. So there are controls available to minimize these concerns, these risks, but they're kind of new and they apply to AI rather than more generally. So, I mean, when you think of security controls, you think of things like role-based access control, right? Only the people who need access should have access. And that's the sort of control that you can apply quite widespread across pretty much any industry that uses an element of information technology. And what's happened with AI is that we've got a new set of concerns, and some of those require unique controls. So things like introducing RAG has been really powerful because it gives us some control over some of those concerns.
Okay.
And yeah, I do think we're sort of slightly stepping out of the bounds of InfoSec when we sort of talk about that stuff. That's more of a kind of a product feature kind of thing, but it's important to be aware of. You can't just sit on your laurels and slap on the same old controls that you do on, I don't know, Salesforce or something of that nature and expect it to work the same.
Oh, that's an interesting point, about resting on your laurels. Like, what sort of developments do you anticipate? Like, how do you see this space developing in the future, I guess? Because obviously we're about to enter a world of agents. I mean, we're in a world of agents. Obviously, Pencil, we've launched agents of our own. You're seeing it across the board. Like you've now got kind of agentic browsers being launched. There's a whole world starting to develop where humans are kind of coexisting with AIs, out there on the internet. How do you think that your kind of perspective on that from an InfoSec standpoint is going to develop over time? Are you thinking about, InfoSec in a world of agents now?
In actual fact, we are very much so. I don't want to give games away or anything else
Okay.
along those lines, but let me give you a hypothetical scenario, right? Because this is the sort of thing we're considering at the moment in the information security team at Pencil. Imagine I'm a Pencil customer and I've got a well-established, effectively working Pencil account. We're generating adverts, we're pushing them out to social media, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not in marketing myself, so if I use any of these words incorrectly, you pick me up, okay, Tom?
Yeah, don't worry.
As I understand it, after a little while, an advert sort of fatigues.
Yeah.
It gets to a point where the metrics nosedive a little bit. People are like, oh, I've seen this advert, they skip it, or perhaps switch to a different channel or whatever. And I can see a time when an agent will be monitoring the metrics for particular adverts and might pull them at a point where their cost effectiveness isn't relevant. And I think, and this is where I'm starting to look, I don't claim to have any answers yet, but this is the future. This is what you were asking for, right? I think the reverse could be true as well, in that once an advert has started to fatigue, we could use agents to say, let's switch to the new advert. And if we do that, we're in a situation where we've effectively got agents with authority to spend on our behalf, right? So we need controls around how does that payment process work? Because there's something called PCI DSS, which is ultimately a whole bunch of security requirements around how we handle cardholder data. So if we give agents the ability to spend money on credit or debit cards or something along those lines, which we'd be looking to do if somebody was an SMB, a small or medium business, rather than sort of invoicing it all in the back end, then that becomes really interesting from an infosec point of view, because now we have to worry not only about the functionality, about making sure that this agent is making the right decisions at the right time, but we're also trying to make sure that the money it's spending is as efficiently spent as possible, is as securely spent as possible. And I think that's the thing to look for on the agent side, is when it starts making decisions. And if I can just sort of stretch that tangent just a little bit more, there will be people out there, not necessarily us because of what we do, but there will be people out there thinking about using agents in terms of real people's data, right? And so they have to comply with UK GDPR and various other privacy laws and regulations. So making sure that your agent is capable of operating within certain bounds is very important.
Yeah, and probably not something that like agentic AI of today, built on sort of, effectively built on large language models and reasoning models, is necessarily that well suited for, because they are effectively, it's probability based outputs, right? Which is not really what you're after when you're looking for, a kind of black and white decision making process that remains exactly within the bounds of a regulation and never strays outside of it. You could perhaps see a future where you're having to augment that technology with something else that is very kind of rules focused,
Yeah, but
and
this is partly why agents are cool, right? Because we can tailor them
yeah,
to do a specific task. So that's why I think we're going to end up in that direction.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, perhaps they'll have, more fully rounded identities of their own in the future. It does kind of boggle the mind what the kind of workplace of 2035 is going to look like. Anyway, I digress. I'm heading on a kind of philosophical tangent. So look, that's kind of, I'm coming up towards the end of the questions that I had for you. There's no questions in the comments. Someone's just commenting on the wasp that happened a little while ago. So people are clearly having fun with that. But no questions. So look, Liam, is there anything that you want to mention or discuss from an InfoSec point of view, from Pencil's point of view on InfoSec, that we haven't touched on today?
There's one thing, I guess,
Okay.
which I think is kind of just a message that I kind of want to put out there, right?
Messages are good.
So when we're talking to customers, there's a tendency to kind of think of onboarding AI tools in a worst case scenario kind of way, right? And I get that. I absolutely get it. InfoSec always is worried about risk management, about the worst case scenario. And you have to kind of find a balance between kind of encouraging innovation within a business, onboarding AIs, and maintaining control over its use, right? We talked about that, and we sort of hinted around governance and things along those lines. And I think the thing that we're doing at Pencil, which is arguably different to a lot of places I've worked or worked with, is that we treat innovation and control, innovation and governance, if you like, as being complementary, not contradictory. And that's the message, right? Is innovation. I mean, you might remember that episode of Friends with Monica. It's like the rules control the fun kind of thing. It's it's about making sure that governance is actually working right alongside with the people that are doing the cool stuff with the cool tech, because I do much better work if I'm right in at the start of a project. Okay, I
Yeah.
can help you to tailor the security that you need in a project right from the off, and it means that we're not in that position of trying to tack a bunch of controls on at the end, or getting upset because somebody in security said that you've missed this requirement, or this law, or whatever, you know. So yeah, treat innovation and control as complementary, not contradictory. That's the message I want people to sort of take away from today.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't recall the Friends episode, but it feels like there's a famous Neil Warnock quote. I don't know if you're a football fan, but he says, by all means enjoy yourselves, but enjoy yourselves by being disciplined. Here he swears, but it's a. So look, we've got a question in from Shane Smith, who says, Liam, what's the current best practice for dealing with a client's legal concerns around adopting AI tools and tech, and how do you go about dealing with the current wild west that is client contract risks? Yeah, good question, Shane. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Liam, your thoughts?
So yeah, that one steps into legal just a little bit, obviously. So that's ever so slightly outside of my remit. But what I'll do is I'll tell you what I do, and this is wearing an information security professional's hat rather than anything else. Okay. So we have an enterprise agreement with ChatGPT through OpenAI, and I have used my account to train some custom GPTs, right? And I can do that by uploading copies of our own internal policy documents, our own internal master service agreements, all of that kind of stuff. And I effectively end up with a GPT, a chatbot, which is very familiar with our processes, policies, legal standards. Okay. And then what I do is I ask it to review new contracts as they come in, and I say, highlight for me anything that obviously conflicts with our standard processes and practices. And what I immediately get back within moments is a list of concerns. Okay, now don't get me wrong, that is not a replacement for a lawyer or anybody else along those lines. But what it does is it means that I'm not now wading through pages and pages of legalese. I've now got areas to focus on. And I will go back and do a manual review. I'm not advocating for the idea of replacing people here. But what I am doing is suggesting that, we can actually use the tools that we're looking to onboard to help us. And by flagging all of those sort of concerns, because they're going to be different for everybody, and I know that's a bit of a weasel, and I'm sorry for that, but your business is going to be based in the UK or in Europe. It's going to have different regulatory requirements. If you're out in the States, then it could be a per state requirement based on privacy, things along those lines. Are you allowed to send data out to Singapore, to Taiwan, to various other places where you might have GCP or AWS infrastructure? All of these kind of data concerns are relevant, and I think the easiest way to kind of get your head around it is actually to cheat a little bit. Use the tools that we're talking about today, get them to flag concerns after you've trained them up on the sort of policies and processes that you like as a business, and then seek legal advice. Okay, because we're infosec professionals, we're procurement professionals, we're data protection people, we're not solicitors, lawyers, and there is no defence better than speaking to somebody who's actually qualified.
Good advice. Always good advice. Speak to an expert, offload the risk, give it to somebody else, let them handle
We
it.
call that transferring the risk.
Brilliant. All right. Well, look, Shane, I hope that answer was sufficient for you. I certainly thought it was wonderful.
And if it's not right, reach out to me on LinkedIn, because I'm happy to help. I'm conscious that was a bit weaselly, Shane.
Well, Shane is welcome to reach out to you if he needs to, but I'm sure it was sufficient. So look, no further questions from the audience, and nothing more from me. So Liam, thanks so much for joining me this week. Everybody else watching, thanks for joining us. It's been another good stream. Just a reminder, we're here every week on Tuesdays, so follow along on LinkedIn and on YouTube. We're talking all sorts of things to do with AI and marketing and the tangential kind of functions around that, as you've seen today with Liam talking InfoSec. We've got lots of conversations about product, we've got features launching, and we're going to have creatives on as well as some special guests from the wider world of AI advertising and marketing. So I hope you'll join us next Tuesday. But for now, Liam, thanks so much for joining me.
Cheers, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.